Welcome to a place where hearts awaken and stories of love and desire come alive. Here, every moment is raw, every touch unforgettable, and every connection reminds us that even after years of emptiness, the body, heart, and soul can feel alive again. Tonight, we journey through a story of longing and loneliness, a story where quiet despair after divorce turns into an unexpected connection, where simple glances and words awaken sensations long forgotten. Feel the electricity of that first touch, the thrill of rediscovered desire, and the gentle reconstruction of a soul once broken. Every breath, every embrace, every whisper is a step toward the rebirth of love and intimacy, proving that even what was thought lost can return stronger than ever. Sit close, let your heart open, and allow yourself to feel the fire of true love rekindled. The years after the divorce stretched out like an endless winter, and every day felt colder than the last. The house, once full of shared laughter and quiet companionship, had become a hollow shell where even the walls seemed to echo emptiness back at me. Nights were the hardest. The quiet pressed in from all sides, and the bed, too big and too lonely, seemed to mock the absence of warmth that had once been familiar, natural, effortless. There was a strange ache that lingered in every corner of life, not just loneliness, though that gnawed steadily, but a deeper hunger for touch, for connection, for the feeling of being wanted by someone who saw every part of me and still desired me. It was as though the body remembered what the heart had tried to bury, a memory of being held, kissed, and cradled into the kind of intimacy that leaves scars of longing when it disappears. In those first months, the emptiness was almost a physical presence. Simple routines became rituals of isolation. Making coffee alone in the morning, eating in silence, walking through the quiet streets while watching others hold hands, laugh, and brush fingers together. It felt as if life was continuing for everyone else, but I had been left behind in some forgotten corner. Sometimes the ache hit with sudden intensity, like a tide that rose too quickly, leaving me gasping, clutching at the sheets, mourning what I didn't even realize I had stopped noticing. The small warmth of a hand on mine, the casual intimacy of someone brushing against me, the safety of a familiar presence that made even ordinary moments feel luminous. Friends tried to offer words, but words were never enough. Their sympathy, even when heartfelt, sometimes made the loneliness sharper, a reminder that no one could inhabit this silence except the one who had lived it. I found myself avoiding phone calls, retreating into the solitude that had become both enemy and companion. Even laughter felt distant, foreign, as though it belonged to another person, a stranger who once inhabited the life I now wandered through. Nights were long not just in hours, but in emotional weight. The quiet became a mirror reflecting every doubt, every regret, every memory of tenderness that had been taken for granted. In that quiet, the body's memory was relentless. Muscles remembered the soft press of someone's hand, the gentle warmth that had lingered after a hug, the heartbeat against skin that used to be a lullaby. It wasn't lust in the shallow sense. It was an aching recognition that touch could awaken more than desire. It could remind the soul of what it had forgotten. Every time the memory surfaced, it brought with it a sharp pang of yearning, a reminder that something essential had been lost, and that loss was not just emotional, but physical, visceral, woven into the very fibers of being. The emptiness seeped into ordinary life. Grocery stores became arenas of unnoticed glances, streets felt more desolate, and even familiar places echoed with absence. Yet in the middle of that emptiness, a subtle awareness began to grow, a recognition that the heart, no matter how battered, was not entirely dead. It still remembered the capacity to feel, to be moved by a touch, a glance, a word. It was faint at first, a tremor beneath layers of grief and self-preservation, but it hinted that life had not entirely forgotten me, that the body, even in its aching, held a quiet promise of return, of awakening. Sometimes, in the depth of the night, tears came unbidden, not just for the past, but for the unrealized possibilities, for the tenderness that had seemed permanent and now felt gone forever. Sleep, when it arrived, was restless, filled with dreams where hands reached out and never quite touched. Voices whispered and vanished. Warmth lingered in memory, but never in reality. And yet, even in these moments, there was a fragile resilience, the sense that the heart, though wounded, was still capable of remembering, of longing, of recognizing when life itself reached back. Then came the unexpected moments. A stranger's kindness, a lingering glance from someone passing by, a conversation that touched more than the mind. These became tiny sparks in the long, cold stretch of emptiness. They didn't erase the ache, but they reminded that it existed for a reason, to prepare for the return of warmth, to keep the body and soul ready for something real, something alive, something that could awaken the parts of life thought forever dormant. The emptiness was no longer just a void. It became a waiting room, a quiet place where the heart learned patience, where the body learned remembrance, and where the soul held its breath for a possibility it almost dared not hope for. Even in the deepest silence, there was a subtle, undeniable truth. The body, the heart, and the soul remembered. They remembered how it felt to be desired, to be held, to be seen. They remembered the quiet intimacy of touch, the way warmth could spread from one soul to another, igniting sensations long forgotten. And though the nights remained long, the cold lingered and the echoes of absence were constant, there was a growing anticipation, a sense that life had not finished its story, that the emptiness was not an end, but a preparation for a return to something more profound, more real, more alive. And in that quiet, the realization settled, soft but undeniable. Even in the deepest emptiness, the heart waits and the body remembers, and when the time comes, the touch that awakens it all will arrive. It started in a way that no one could have predicted, without grand gestures or promises whispered in the dark. It wasn't fireworks or sudden revelation. It was a quiet unfolding, almost imperceptible at first. There was someone whose presence lingered in a room in a way that drew attention without demanding it, whose eyes held a warmth that reached deeper than polite conversation, deeper than casual friendliness. It was in those lingering glances, subtle yet unrelenting, that the first threads of something long forgotten began to stir. The heart, numbed for so long, felt a curious flutter, and the body remembered sensations it had not felt in years. The memory of being truly noticed, truly desired, quietly awakening in every nerve. Words became their own form of touch, delicate and precise, with a rhythm that resonated beyond the surface. A conversation that lasted for minutes, or sometimes hours, would leave an echo behind, a tremor that lingered long after the other had left. It was not about flirtation or games. It was a recognition, an unspoken acknowledgement that each word, each pause mattered. That recognition, that quiet intensity, started to fill spaces that had been empty for decades. Numbness softened in the warmth of attention that was patient, observant, and tender, allowing feelings that had been buried under years of habit and resignation to surface. The presence of someone who truly saw, without expectation, without hurry, created a subtle but powerful awakening. There were small gestures, a hand brushing lightly against mine, a smile that seemed to understand unspoken thoughts, a voice that reached into the hidden corners of heartache, and each one carried a weight of intimacy that went unnoticed in ordinary life, but struck with sudden clarity when the soul had been aching for it. The world seemed sharper, brighter, more alive, as if suddenly color had returned to places long faded. Every ordinary interaction was suffused with quiet electricity. Desire did not rush in. It returned like a tide that had been held back by walls of caution and grief. There was no dramatic moment, no cinematic revelation, just a gradual, insistent reawakening. The skin remembered the warmth of proximity, the nervous thrill of a light touch, the slow realization that being wanted and appreciated could feel safe and profound at the same time. The heart, so long weighed down by emptiness, began to beat with a renewed rhythm, syncing with this unexpected connection in ways that felt almost miraculous. The presence became essential without demanding it. It wasn't about possession or urgency. It was about feeling seen and understood in a way that had not existed before. Moments spent in silence together were just as electric as those filled with words, because the connection was deeper than conversation. It was recognition, affirmation, and a gentle reminder that desire and intimacy were still possible. Every glance, every careful, deliberate smile carried the weight of meaning, and it was intoxicating in its subtlety. With each encounter, a sense of vulnerability grew, delicate but compelling. Allowing oneself to feel again after so many years of numbness was terrifying, yet impossible to resist. There was a tension not born of fear, but of anticipation, the body responding before the mind could rationalize, the heart remembering before it had been told it was safe. In this awakening, every touch, every shared moment became a revelation. Life, long thought dull and predictable, suddenly held a promise that was soft, profound, and utterly consuming. The reawakening was not sudden. It crept in through tiny, persistent threads that wove themselves through every day. A word said just so, a hand lingering near mine for a moment longer than necessary, an understanding glance that said what words never could. Each interaction chipped away at the numbness, revealing a heart and body that had been waiting patiently, unknowingly, for the spark of recognition that only such an unexpected connection could provide. There was an innocence to it, yet also a deep, unshakable intensity that made even the simplest interactions feel monumental. It was in the small, almost imperceptible gestures that the truth revealed itself. A gentle touch on the arm, a shared laugh that lingered in the chest, a moment when eyes met and held. These became the evidence of a desire that was growing, subtle but undeniable. The body and the heart, long forgotten companions, remembered how to respond to warmth, how to accept intimacy, how to allow themselves to feel deeply again. Even in moments apart, the connection persisted, a quiet hum beneath the surface of everyday life. Thoughts returned to these encounters unbidden, a smile forming in the solitude of routine, a heartbeat quickening at the memory of a lingering gaze. Desire, once thought extinguished, returned slowly, tenderly, with a force that surprised and overwhelmed in equal measure. The awakening was not just about longing, it was about recognition. It was proof that even after years of numbness, even after silence had settled deep in the bones, the capacity to feel, to crave, to be seen and cherished again was alive. The unexpected connection had done more than touch the surface. It had stirred the very essence of what had lain dormant, reminding that desire, tenderness, and intimacy could flourish again, even in the places where it had been thought forever lost. And in that quiet realization, it became undeniable. Life, even after long seasons of emptiness, could still offer connection that awakened every sense and memory, and the heart, once closed, could open again. The first time his hand brushed against mine, it was as if every nerve in my body had suddenly remembered what it meant to be alive. The world, once dulled by years of routine and quiet resignation, snapped into sharp focus. The air seemed charged, as if even the light bending across the room had caught its own breath, holding it in anticipation. That touch was not accidental nor fleeting. It carried a weight, a gravity that spoke of recognition, of being seen, of being wanted in a way that had long been forgotten. It was electric, yes, but it was more than that. It was a memory awakened, a fire long buried rekindled with a single, impossible brush of skin against skin. It was not about lust. It was about validation, about the primal understanding that the body could feel, that it could respond, that it could remember the sweetness of intimacy without shame, without apology. The touch sent ripples through every thought, quieting the mind while igniting the senses. The pulse quickened not just in the chest, but in the fingertips, the spine, the small muscles that had forgotten tension from anticipation. It reminded me that being noticed, being cherished even briefly, could shift the entire axis of the day, that life could feel urgent and tender in the same heartbeat. I remembered what it was to crave closeness, to long for warmth, to want the press of another's hand in mine. For so long, that desire had been silent, muted beneath layers of grief, practicality, and the quiet resignation that came with years spent believing such sensations were no longer possible. And yet, in that moment, the body spoke louder than the mind ever could. Every flicker of skin on skin carried a language unspoken but understood, recognition, attention, passion, and the promise of something real. The world around us seemed to fade. Conversations continued in the background, distant and irrelevant. The brush of his hand was enough to anchor reality, to create a gravity that drew me in, one that I had not known I had been missing. There was tenderness in the way he lingered, subtle but deliberate, the careful respect beneath a boldness that both startled and comforted. It was a paradox, intense yet soft, commanding yet gentle, awakening a part of the self that had been hidden, protected, and almost forgotten. Every heartbeat after that seemed to echo the sensation of that touch. Even the memory lingered like a perfume, faint and intoxicating, infusing ordinary moments with a hidden current of electricity. A casual hand brushing mine across a table, the soft pressure as he passed something into my hand, the accidental leaning together while walking, it all resonated with the weight of that first contact. The body remembered every detail, the warmth, the pressure, the thrill of recognition in that fleeting connection. It was in that touch that desire began to bloom again, not rushed, not frantic, but with the patient, slow unfolding of something genuine. Passion and tenderness fused into a form that felt raw and real, as though all the years of waiting, of emptiness, had been preparing for the right moment, the right hands, the right touch. It was not urgent, not forced, not performative. It was simply alive. Every inch of awareness hummed with vitality, with the knowledge that being desired was not shameful, that longing was not weakness, and that intimacy could exist in its purest, most transformative form. The memory of that brush of fingers became a touchstone, a quiet reminder of what had been dormant and could now return. Nights became longer with anticipation, even in solitude, because the mind and body had awakened to possibility. Every small gesture after that, passing near each other in a room, a glance that lasted a heartbeat longer than necessary, a casual hand resting for a moment too long, was infused with the electricity of that first touch. The simplest movements carried weight, and the space between us was suddenly charged with potential. It was not only about passion, it was about connection. It was about being seen and acknowledged in ways that went beyond words. The touch spoke of understanding, of care, of an intimacy that began before anything physical had truly happened. It reminded the soul that desire was not something fleeting or shameful, but essential, alive, and transformative. In those seconds, it felt as though the universe itself had paused, honoring the awakening of something that had long been dormant, a fire reigniting that promised to illuminate the darkness of years spent in quiet solitude. Even now, recalling it brings the body to attention, a shiver running down the spine, a warmth in the chest that cannot be denied. The hand that brushed mine was more than just flesh. It was a key, a spark, a call to remember what life could feel like when touch was not only physical, but soulful. Passion intertwined with tenderness, desire entwined with care, creating something unforgettable and impossible to ignore. That first brush of his hand changed everything. It reminded the heart, the body, and the mind that life could be lived again in intensity and softness at the same time, and that awakening through touch was the beginning of remembering how to be fully alive. From the emptiness that had settled like a shadow over every day, something began to stir, a hunger that was bigger than longing, bigger than need. It was not just a craving for touch or affection, though those things had been absent for far too long. It was a hunger for life itself, a fierce, trembling desire to feel again in ways that had been buried under years of routine, loss, and quiet resignation. Each moment spent near him, each brush of skin, each shared glance, seemed to pull fragments of a soul long fragmented back into alignment. There was a rhythm, almost imperceptible at first, that stitched together pieces of a being that had learned to survive, but not to thrive. The nights together were not hurried or mechanical. They were careful, deliberate, reverent. Each kiss lingered, not just on lips but on the memory, on the nervous pulse of anticipation that had lain dormant for so long. Each breath shared in quiet intimacy carried meaning beyond the physical, a silent affirmation that life could still feel urgent, soft, and electric all at once. In those moments the past, the years of absence, the grief, the numbness, began to melt away. They dissolved into something warmer, something that acknowledged the pain but refused to be defined by it. Every touch became a thread, weaving the fractured pieces back into something whole, something capable of both giving and receiving. There was tenderness in every encounter that made the intensity of desire feel safe, sacred, and real. Hands did not simply roam. They remembered, learned, and explored in ways that honored the body's memory while celebrating its rediscovery. Lips did not just meet lips. They traced lines of vulnerability, coaxed out secret places that had been closed off, and whispered unspoken truths back to the heart. The body, once dormant in its response, awakened slowly, joyfully, like a garden that had survived a long, harsh winter finally feeling the sun. It was a resurrection not of lust alone, but of the self, alive, alert, yearning, and cherished. Breathing together became an act of intimacy that transcended what had been lost. Even when silent, the space between hearts was alive, pulsing with recognition and need. Desire was no longer a simple physical reaction. It was an acknowledgement that the soul had been reawakened, that longing could exist without shame, and that connection could heal what had been broken. There was a rhythm to it, a push and pull that felt ancient, instinctual, and utterly human, a dialogue spoken through fingertips, shivers, and sighs. Every kiss, every touch, every embrace was a stitch in a tapestry of restoration, piecing together what had been frayed, abandoned, or forgotten. It was astonishing to feel the depth of what had been missing, not simply the warmth of a body beside another, but the realization that being wanted, truly desired, could awaken layers of joy, tenderness, and vulnerability that had been buried beneath survival. Each night together brought discovery of limits, of needs, of pleasures long ignored. There was laughter too, quiet and spontaneous, that bubbled up amid intimacy, reminding that life could be playful, light, and intoxicating, even after decades of wait. Desire and love intertwined, a seamless dance of passion and connection that transcended the physical to touch the deepest parts of the heart. There were moments when the world outside faded entirely, leaving only the pulse of togetherness, the shared warmth, the deep understanding that this was more than fleeting. Each encounter was proof that life could be reclaimed, that emptiness could be replaced with fullness, that the heart, even when scarred, could open again. It was a resurrection of sorts, yes, but one gentle enough to honor the pain, tender enough to nurture what had been wounded, and fierce enough to awaken a desire that was vibrant, alive, and unstoppable. The rediscovery of desire brought with it a rediscovery of self. Confidence, courage, and joy returned not as sudden gifts, but as slow, steady currents that built over time. The body, the heart, the mind, all aligned in recognition that life was not over, that passion could be both exhilarating and safe, that intimacy could teach lessons in trust, surrender, and delight that had been forgotten. Nights of shared warmth became rituals of healing, of restoration, of remembering what it meant to feel fully, to give fully, to live fully. Even beyond the moments of closeness, the effects lingered. Days were brighter, the world sharper, the senses alive to the smallest joys. The memory of a touch, a kiss, a whisper continued to echo, a gentle pulse that reminded that the self could be whole again. Desire was no longer a whisper in the dark, but a song, bold, insistent, and undeniable. Life had returned to its fullest, with love and passion intertwined in a way that made every moment electric, precious, and alive. There was a power in this rebirth that went beyond physicality. It was proof that love could heal, that desire could awaken what was thought lost, that intimacy could stitch together the frayed edges of a soul. The ache of absence became a distant memory, replaced by the fire of connection, by tenderness that was fierce and unyielding, by the profound truth that even after years of emptiness, the heart, the body, and the soul could remember how to feel, how to crave, and how to be wholly alive once again. And in the quiet aftermath of every night, the certainty settled softly. What was once thought lost could be found again, and the hunger for love and life had returned, unstoppable and beautiful. Thank you for sharing this journey of longing, awakening, and rebirth with me. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, subscribe, and click the notification bell to join our family of souls, rediscovering love and passion every day. Share your thoughts, your feelings, and your own moments of awakening in the comments below. Your story could inspire someone else to remember that desire, intimacy, and deep connection are never truly lost. Stay connected, stay open, and until next time, let your heart always remember the power of being seen, wanted, and alive.